Today I'm giving you for free the full guide to leveraging ChatGPT or any other decent text AIs to make your trip safer, healthier, easier, more fun, more valuable, and just better in every way. Most people don't realize they have a borderline expert psychedelic guru at their fingertips that they can talk to as much as they want to right now without spending any money, and I'm going to show you exactly how to leverage it to maximize benefits and minimize risks. Now ChatGPT doesn't want to get sued, so the first principle here is that we're sometimes going to have to work with hypotheticals. We create a nice, safe set and setting to make it comfortable telling us all the things that it would usually be too shy to say out loud. Before I share all my secrets, I need to first make it clear that I'm not promoting anyone actually take psychedelics or any drugs for that matter. This is an educational guide on how to do whatever you were going to do anyways and make it safer. So having said that, it's vital that you realize that AI might be smart, but just like you, it's also going to sometimes hallucinate and straight up just be wrong. You can see the problem here if you're using it to prepare for your trips. The worst thing you can do is watch this guide, start using AI for everything because it really is so overpowered, and now you suddenly took too much because you didn't double check what it told you. Make sure you watch this full guide till the end. There's life-changing value here from start to finish, and you don't want to miss out on the golden nuggets at the end of the video to supercharge your results from this whole guide. So let's start with intention. Why are we tripping in the first place? Regardless of whether you're trying to quit an addiction, cure some mental health problem, or just have some good old fun, everyone's going to benefit from having an intention. It's going to give the trip purpose and minimize risks of regret. It's also just going to improve our ability to surrender to the experience and not resist or fight the effects, which will just make for a more fun, enjoyable trip with greater clarity. If you're new to tripping or setting an intention and have no idea where to start, it can always help to just straight up ask GPT something like, what are some common intentions people set for a psychedelic experience? Using these as inspiration, ask yourself, why are you tripping? Is it to change some aspect of your identity, or for some sort of social reason, or just to have fun? Whatever it is, it can make a huge difference on how we interact with ChatGPT, and don't worry, by the end we'll cover everything you need to know. So first things first, let's begin by writing our situation. In this guide, our example is going to be someone who wants to improve their diet for a wide variety of reasons. So very simply, we can write, I'm going to take shrooms and want to clarify my intention. Here's a bit about me and my current situation. I've been struggling with certain vices and bad habits, especially eating unhealthy food. Can you help me set an intention for my trip? Now, all of this advice is generally going to be great, but it might not be specific enough because we weren't specific enough. ChatGPT and most text AIs are like a mirror. So let's do what it told us and add more nuance about our situation. If you're worried about privacy, for ChatGPT, go into settings, data controls, and turn off chat history and training, though this will mean you only have access to one chat at a time, so keep that in mind. So for your context, here's a list of things you can consider adding. How's your physical and mental health right now? Any recent major life changes or events, or things you've been ruminating on a lot? How many times have you tripped before? At what doses? Or do you have any other experience with other drugs? What are your religious or non-religious beliefs? Are there any other aspects of your identity that you value? With whatever issue you're trying to solve right now, what problems is that causing in your life, and what are you missing out on because of that? What benefits would you gain from fixing these issues or improving them? If you already know it, what's the dose and/or environment you plan to trip in? If you don't already know, that's equally fine. I'll be showing you exactly how to plan it out effectively to align with your intention anyways. There's also a lot of ways in which a bad diet can be fixed or improved, so if we want, we can also write down how specifically we want to fix it. Whether that's overcoming cravings, improving self-control regardless of cravings, or maybe finding some other underlying root cause. For more inspiration, we can also just ask GPT how our trip might help us. For my example, I'm going to be a responsible newbie tripper with only a couple trips under my belt, fairly good mental health and okay physical health, no recent significant life events, and let's say we want to focus on minimizing cravings. Something psychedelics can definitely do and have personally done for me, where after an acid trip, I just found any unhealthy food literally repulsive. I know this is possible because from that day as a complete sugar addict with no effort at all on my end, eating perfectly healthy became not just easy, but the only option I could actually enjoy. Now, since our goal is going to focus on craving minimization, all we have to do is ask how we can use our trip to help us do this, and look how much good advice we're getting. Now it's time to turn all of this into an intention. You can try doing it yourself, or again, we can ask, can you write me 5 example intentions for the content context I've given you. I wouldn't recommend you make this number too big. The smaller it is, the more thought it will put into each one, and so the better they'll be. Also, the more details about your current life situation you add, the more personalized and useful your intention is likely to be as well, so don't be afraid to go more in depth and help steer it in the right direction if you're not happy with its examples. You can keep iterating and asking the AI to refine and improve your to-be intention until you have something you're happy with. Also, just in case GPT doesn't tell you this, make sure you're making positive-based intentions. So instead of framing it as you don't want to eat junk food anymore because it makes you feel bad, frame it as you want to eat healthy food because it makes you feel good. You can also do this yourself, and I suggest you finish with 3 versions of your intention: a long version, a medium version, and a super short 1, maybe 2-word version. If your intention though is just to have fun, first I gotta ask if psychedelics are really the way you want to go do that, because that's not really how they work, and whilst it can be a valid intention, typically the people who have this intention don't understand what they're getting themselves into, so make sure fun isn't about escaping anything. If you feel bad, psychedelics are most likely going to make you feel worse, since they're emotional amplifiers, not feel-good chemicals. Though we can be honest, usually they do feel really good. I don't think I've ever felt as good as I did during one of my mushroom trips. But yeah, if your intention is just to have fun, GPT knows it has to be careful, and it's going to be quite wary of giving you the best information it has, so let it know that even though your intention is to have fun, you're having that fun in the context of some greater growth, like sharing a bonding experience with someone. Remember, it's quite rare to be completely unchanged after a trip. It's not usually something casual you can do and just shrug off after the fact like it never happened, so do take the advice of everyone who's tried these things before and don't be irresponsible with them. So once you're done, as a safety measure, ask GPT if your intention is generally appropriate for your context and see what it has to say. It's also vital to understand that intention is simply an intention, not an attachment to an outcome. You should always be open to realizing during your trip that maybe your intention was simply the branch of a deeper root, and you need to be able to be flexible with it. The psychedelic experience is often unpredictable, so don't let your intention turn into something that blocks you from having new unexpected insights or tries to force your trip to go any which way. Let it be a guiding star rather than a clear-cut path. Now that we have an intention, we can use that to tailor our dose, set, and setting to fit our intention as best as possible. So we can paste it over and begin by asking, what's the best dose to take for maximal alignments? And if you want more details and explanations, ask it for a spectrum like this. I also recommend you ask which 3 doses it thinks is optimal and ask it to explain why for each one. Just don't forget that how a particular dose affects people will vary a lot, and the responses it gives are just going to be a general guide to take into account, not to take 100% literally as what you should do. Especially because most of the time you don't even know the exact dose you're taking. Make sure to also go on the page for your specific drug on Psychonaut Wiki and Erowid and read more about dosing, effects, and safety. If you do already know the setting you're going to trip in, make sure to throw that into the prompt as soon as possible before asking doses. If you don't know, ask separately, because if we ask too much all at once, the answers it gives won't be as well thought through or detailed for each thing, and it could miss something important. Same goes if you already know your dose but want to plan out an ideal setting. Remember, if you're new to tripping, you should be starting with a low dose. If you mention that in your context, it'll advise the same, so make sure not to conveniently forget that. For setting, like before, we can use the same principles, but instead of asking for a spectrum, we can ask for a bunch of examples, and once we know what setting we want to be in for our trip, for example, if we're tripping in a room, we can now think about what objects we want in there. There's things that are pretty much always a good idea, like an easy to use music device, paper and pens, maybe some light snacks like fruits. We also have to consider if we're tripping alone versus with people, and any other environmental factors like outside noises or possible interruptions. Remember, you don't want to be going into a trip with any responsibilities because you simply don't know if you're going to be able to do them. Especially with anything above a low dose, it should be completely okay if you just lie down and don't move for the whole trip. That attitude of I'll be fine, I can call my friend and do this thing I promised them real quick during my trip, or fronting any kind of necessary work you'll have to do in that time is just straight up a bad idea, so make sure you're definitely free for the entire time and even some hours after you expect it to wear off. In fact, ideally, you'd be free that whole day and the next day for integration as well. Also, it's a good idea to have some kind of emergency plan. Ideally, you'd have a sober trip sitter you can summon and send away with as little friction as possible, or have some trip killers on hand or a safe space you can go to. You can discuss all of these things with GPT as part part of your preparation. For our set, meaning mindset, it's obviously not as straightforward, but generally for the best results, we want to be optimizing this at least a few days leading up to our trip, and we don't need AI for this. Here it's going to be less about doing and more about not doing. For example, we want to avoid consuming general negativity from any source, especially things like mainstream news, and being really careful with what we consume overall. Think of it like eating healthy or even fasting, but for your thoughts instead. I also recommend practices like journaling and observing your thoughts or contemplating your intention leading up to the trip, just like we might do during the trip itself, as this can help us feel ready and increase emotional stability. There's also loads of stress reduction techniques that actually work and are completely free and easy to do, like NSDR or physiological side breathing, that you can look into. You can also ask GPT for more advice directly, but that's too obvious, so to take things further, we know mindfulness can have a huge positive impact on our experiences, so I also recommend you tell it to suggest me some introspective questions that I can answer to help guide me in cultivating more mindfulness for my trip. Throw in I'm looking for questions that encourage self-reflection and mental preparation tailored to my intention, and you can get some really valuable thoughts just from answering these. And now we can move on to integration. Integration is taking everything we learned from the trip and turning it into real-life solid results that we get to keep. When you trip, your brain does a kind of reboot where your old patterns of behavior can be more malleable and more easily changed afterwards. This power can be used for both good and bad, which is why lazy integration or no integration at all can make tripping a net negative. It's important you start your integration as soon after your trip as possible. This can mean journaling and writing a trip report, or even just talking to someone about it, but I do still recommend getting it down somewhere in some form that you can look back over later. Like with the intention questions, you can ask it to provide a template, but before you do, write down what happened in your trip from start to finish. Ideally write as much as you can. The better your trip report, the better the advice. This is unrelated to AI, but some of the best integration advice I can give you is to be careful with jumping to conclusions about your trip. A lot of people can get lost early on in what they thought everything meant or why they might have experienced what they did, but you might still be having insights about your trips days, weeks, months, maybe even years later, so don't rush to conclusions about quitting your job no matter how emotionally charged you are about it, especially when you are emotionally charged. Trust me, I already know it can feel more real than real, but that realness can still often be misleading in ways you learn through experience. Not that it's always misleading, but it can be, and it's hard to know when it is or isn't. Having said that, just like you can ask AI to help interpret what your dreams might have meant, you can do the same with your trip and ask it about possible interpretations. Remember, since there might be loads and loads to talk about, my most recent trip report was over 6,000 words. In this case, it's going to help if you focus on specific sections at a time so that the AI can go into more detail for each one. If your trip report is really long, some AIs won't be able to read and remember it all, so look for one with a higher context window. For even better practical results, I recommend you set some goals for yourself and carve out your future path after your trip like you might do with your New Year's resolution. Having a clear understanding of your new identity reduces ambiguity and will probably help you feel more grounded coming out of the trip. Be careful though, whilst it's entirely possible that after your trip you'll just not crave unhealthy food anymore, tripping isn't a magic pill and it's usually not going to work like that. There's still resistance to overcome to walk any path, including the path you want. The point is that if you do this right, your trip should be reducing that short-term resistance. If you're finding it still really hard, or dare I say even harder, that actually might mean you're onto something and your body and mind are throwing up all their last bits of resistance. This isn't the time to give up, especially if your trip was in the last 2 weeks. The trap here is that it can be fun and exciting to set unrealistic goals since you might feel reborn and able to achieve them, but once that afterglow wears off after a week or two, your new workload might become overwhelming. So be mindful of that and remember that a single trip isn't usually going to be enough to quit every single addiction you have or to completely change your personality to exactly how you want it to be. The point is to chip away at it and keep that up consistently over time. Integration is a long-term ongoing process, not just a quick list of to-dos to check off within the week. Another trap here is feeling like you've had so much growth from your trip that you don't even need to do any work or integration because you've already gotten the results you wanted. With a mindset like this, those results are very likely to wear off, which can also result in a net negative. Now let's hyper-optimize. When it comes to supplementation, talking to ChatGPT might be a little more tricky, but there's no denying that supplements have the potential to improve our trip, especially when it comes to substances like MDMA, which can be harder on the body. Whilst I've been using AI myself to create ideal supplement protocols and I've had really great success, I played around with ChatGPT for from the lens of a newbie, and the advice it gave was pretty terrible. While some of the suggestions were great, it also recommended I take 5-HTP before acid, and when I questioned it on this, it doubled down. It wasn't until I specifically said myself why this combination might not be ideal did it suddenly acknowledge it was incorrect. I'm fairly well versed in supplementation and the physiology of that, so I would spot things like this, but having planned to recommend this before, and then having tried it out and gotten the responses I did, I changed my mind and actually advise against using ChatGPT for supplement advice. The last thing you need in your trip, and especially the come up, is random things like arbitrary supplements to be worrying about, because suddenly you realized AI can actually be wrong about things and your pre-trip sober self took it for granted. Still, this is a full guide, so I'll tell you the prompts you can use to get the information out of it. Obviously do this at your own risk, know what you're doing, and make sure to really quintuple check any protocol you create at the very least. Since it can be hesitant to share about this, here's the prompt to actually get it to talk to you about it. You can continue to roleplay as the medical professional and ask it questions regarding your patient. Sometimes with ChatGPT, you just gotta be patient. Next up is one of the most underrated aspects of tripping, your diet. There's not much you can do with AI here. You probably already know which foods are healthy, which foods are unhealthy. Try to eat as healthy as you can leading up to the trip, regardless of your intention. It'll help reduce anxiety, make you feel more comfortable in your body, improve self-esteem, and much more. If you want to copy me and be hardcore about it, tell AI exactly what you've been eating and ask it what you can eat leading up to your trip, given your diet, for best results. And you can also discuss with it the timing of your last meal before taking your dose. Bear in mind, my diet is almost 100% healthy, which at some point gives you diminishing returns. If your diet isn't already exceptional, I suggest putting your energy into just making it healthier rather than all of this AI stuff, as that's probably going to be more impactful. But also, try not to obsess over perfection either. I've had really great trips where I ate like shit. Your mindset and self-esteem is the true trip decider here, and paradoxically, if eating healthier is going to lower your self-esteem because you take on this mindset that you still aren't perfectly healthy, when before you didn't even think about it, in this case, eating healthier probably worsened your trip. I'll just throw this in there, you can further hyper-optimize with various breathing techniques, meditation, etc. For instance, I found Wim Hof breathing while tripping to be really crazy. Good job on making it to the endish. We've still got some golden nuggets for you. I just first want to say that AI isn't going away. A lot of people like things to be more natural, and while it's fine to have that preference, it's not a competitive preference. You will inevitably get left behind as AI tools become better and better, whilst those who are using them are getting more and more results. Even though AI isn't great right now, to the point where you don't need it at all to still have completely ideal trips, it's only going to improve over the years, and getting that experience in now will probably set you up to leverage future AIs better and faster. So you still being here shows me you're on a great path and clearly value the value of your trips a lot, so respect to you. As another safety measure before your trip, once you've done all your preparation, ask it for red flags. This gives you yet another safety net, but most AIs will still give you things even if your trip is perfectly set up. This is more about double checking those things yourself and making sure you're good. Don't get caught up in anxiety here because you need GPT to tell you you're good in every possible way, and go ahead and take the drugs because it's not going to do that. Okay, so here's the golden nuggets. There are prompts which have been shown to consistently make ChatGPT and other AIs give better answers. For example, show you're working, take a deep breath, and think step by step. Those three are all great, and if you want to research more, that could definitely be a productive thing to do. If you're really hardcore, look into something called Tree of Thoughts. Also, since I started making this, there's been some new research that role-playing, for example, asking it to play the role of a therapist, can actually make the responses a little bit worse, so I'd only be doing that if there's no other way to get a response out of it. And last but definitely not least, if you want better results from this entire full guide, simply take all the prompts I've given you, and for each one, instead of copy and pasting it or typing it out exactly like I have, start a new chat and send it this. Then in the old chat, edit the question to what you were going to type anyway, but use the prompt it gives you instead. You can even go meta and try it for this prompt. This not only gives you better, more personalized advice, but it also teaches you yourself how to prompt engineer so that with each trip you get better at doing it. Remember though, AI is not a replacement for a therapist or a doctor or a shaman. There are inherent risks with doing this on your own like this, and while watching this guide puts you well ahead of the masses are also still just discovering fire and inventing the wheel. We're very early into knowing how to use these substances ideally, so maximum caution should always be used. So let me know in the comments below if you've used AI to improve your trips, how that's gone, and if you think I missed anything. Peace.